Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're tackling a pretty big one, the origin of life. And
Hmm.
not just how it, first sparked, in those early primordial
Sure.
whatever,
Right.
but, how we went from these simple molecules to the complex cells that make up, you know, well, everything.
Yeah, it's a question that I think surprisingly gets less attention than you might think.
Yeah,
We're out there mapping galaxies and decoding DNA,
right.
yet how life began on our own planet is still such a mystery.
Exactly. And that's what makes Nick Lane's book, The Vital Question, so fascinating. It's like he's taking us on this detective hunt through billions of years
Yeah.
with energy as the main clue. He starts off by saying there's this black hole at the heart of biology. We
Right.
got evolution figured out. We know how that works.
Right.
But the specific path life took, that's where there are a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah. And it's not even just that we're missing pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
There's almost a hesitation to admit how much we don't know about life's beginnings.
Yeah, it's like everyone's afraid to say, hey, we don't have all the answers.
Right.
But that's where the real breakthroughs happen, right?
Absolutely. And luckily, the past few decades have just been full of these revolutions
Yeah.
in how we understand early life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, think about Lynn Margulis's theory of symbiosis.
Right.
The idea that complex cells formed from simpler ones teaming up.
Right.
It completely changed how we view the evolution of life.
Like our mitochondria.
Exactly.
Those little energy factories in our cells, they were once free-living bacteria.
Exactly.
That's mind-blowing.
It is. And then you've got Carl Woese's work,
Mm.
which, revealed this whole new domain of life, the archaea.
Right.
Basically rewrote the textbooks on how we categorize life.
So we went from 2 basic cell types to 3. It's like discovering a whole new continent we
Yeah.
never even knew existed.
Right.
Wow.
And then on top of that, we can't forget the genomic revolution. Sequencing thousands of genomes has given us this mountain of data.
Yeah.
But it's also made things a bit trickier,
Right.
interpreting all these genetic signals from the distant past.
Right. It's almost like having too many pieces of the puzzle
Yeah.
makes it harder to see the full picture.
Exactly.
But Lane argues that even with all this new information,
Hmm.
those traditional evolutionary theories, they still struggle to explain why life remains simple for so long.
Yeah, because, those theories often focus on the environment as this main driver.
Right.
Like it's all about the right conditions.
Mm-hmm.
But what if the limitations were actually internal?
Okay.
Like imagine there's a speed limit on evolution,
Okay.
something holding life back from getting more complex.
So it's not just about the right conditions, but the cells themselves having the right equipment.
Precisely.
Okay.
Lane calls these energetic constraints.
Okay.
And he points to these long stretches of time where life stayed pretty basic,
Mm-hmm.
followed by these sudden bursts of complexity.
Right.
This pattern suggests that there were these internal barriers,
Yeah.
especially at the cellular levels, that
Yeah.
had to be overcome.
It's like there were these roadblocks on the evolutionary highway,
Yeah.
and only a few organisms managed to find a detour.
And one of the keys to understanding these roadblocks, according to Lane,
Yeah.
lies in how cells generate energy,
Okay.
proton gradients across membranes.
Okay, now things are getting interesting.
Yeah,
This proton gradient thing sounds a bit technical.
it is a bit quirky.
Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, think of it like this: every living cell,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's in a bacteria or a plant, or
Yeah.
uses this same mechanism to power itself.
Okay.
It's like this universal energy currency.
So instead of molecules just reacting directly,
Yeah,
it's more like these tiny batteries are driving all the processes.
that's a great way to visualize it.
Okay.
And what's even more fascinating is that this proton gradient idea
Yeah.
might be linked to the very origin of life itself
Okay.
in a place called alkaline hydrothermal vents.
Alkaline hydrothermal vents, that sounds a bit more sci-fi than Cradle of Life.
It does.
Yeah.
But hear me out. Imagine these underwater geysers
Okay.
spewing out this hot alkaline fluid
Mm-hmm.
rich in chemicals like hydrogen.
Oh.
Not exactly a tropical paradise.
Right.
But it turns out these vents create this continuous flow of energy
Okay.
in a form that could have sparked the first life processes.
Hold on. Are we talking about those proton gradients again?
Exactly.
Oh.
The structure of these vents with their thin mineral walls
Mm.
naturally creates proton gradients.
Okay.
Lane suggests that these gradients could have provided the energy needed for this critical reaction, combining hydrogen and carbon dioxide,
Right.
the basic building blocks of life.
It's all starting to click now.
Yeah.
So instead of this primordial soup, we've got this picture of life emerging
Yeah.
from these energetic underwater
And
vents.
there's more.
What?
These vents also contain iron-sulfur minerals, which
Yeah.
act like natural catalysts, speeding up important chemical reaction.
So it's like nature set up the perfect lab for life to emerge.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's not just ancient history.
Right.
Those same iron-sulfur minerals
Yeah.
are still found in the core of many essential proteins in modern cells.
Oh, wow.
So there's this deep connection to those early life forms.
So we've got this exciting new view of life's beginnings fueled by these proton gradients in these vents.
Yeah.
But how did we go from simple cells in those vents
Right.
to the complex life we see today?
Well, that brings us to one of the biggest leaps in evolution.
Yeah.
The jump from simple prokaryotic cells to complex eukaryotic cells.
Okay.
And that's where mitochondria really take center stage.
You mean those former bacteria that became the powerhouses of our cells?
Exactly.
I'm ready to dive into that story.
Let's do it.
Okay.
But before we get there, we need to understand a fundamental difference between bacteria and archaea,
Okay.
even though both rely on proton gradients.
So we've got these two types of simple cells that seem similar but have some key differences in how they work.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Lane suggests that these differences didn't arise from adapting to extreme environments,
Okay.
but from a split that happened because of, well, leaky membranes.
Leaky membranes, that doesn't sound very helpful for survival.
It might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but in the early stages of evolution, leaky membranes were actually essential.
Okay.
They allowed for this constant flow of energy
Mm-hmm.
in the form of those protons we were talking about.
Okay.
However, this leakiness also limited how much they could evolve.
So it's like they were stuck in this low energy rut
Precisely.
because of their leaky membrane.
Now let's contrast that with eukaryotes.
Okay.
They're unique in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
They have a nucleus to store their DNA.
Right.
They reproduce sexually.
Yeah.
And they age.
Right.
All traits you never see in bacteria or archaea.
Right.
And all of these traits are linked to the arrival of mitochondria.
It's mind-blowing to think that these tiny organelles had such a huge impact.
Absolutely. On the course of evolution.
Mitochondria fundamentally changed the energy landscape of eukaryotic cells.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like they gave them this massive power boost.
Okay.
This allowed for larger genomes, greater complexity,
Right.
and the evolution of all those unique eukaryotic features.
This is where things start to get really complex, but also super exciting.
Yeah,
So are we ready to delve into the world of mitochondria?
let's do it.
All right, so we've established that mitochondria, these ancient bacteria that took up residence in our cells,
Right.
were like a total game changer for life on Earth.
Yeah.
They basically like supercharged evolution.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing this cozy relationship wasn't all smooth sailing, right?
You're absolutely right. This merger, this symbiosis,
Yeah.
also came with its share of challenges.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, for one thing, the host cell had to deal with this influx of genetic material
Yeah.
from the mitochondria,
Right.
including these things called introns. Introns, those bits of DNA that, like, we used to think were just junk
Exactly.
hanging around in our cells.
Lane suggests that many of these introns actually originated from the bacteria that became mitochondria.
Okay.
So imagine this, the host cell,
Mm-hmm.
essentially still an archaea at this point,
Right.
is suddenly bombarded with all this foreign DNA.
Talk about an unwelcome house guest.
It's like a genetic Trojan horse.
So how did those early eukaryotes handle this sudden genetic invasion?
Lane proposes a couple of reasons. First, those early eukaryotes
Mm-hmm.
were probably a pretty small, genetically unstable population to begin with.
Okay.
So it's this classic survival of the fittest scenario.
Right.
Only the cells that could tolerate this influx of introns made it.
Makes sense. The weak links would have been weeded out pretty quickly.
Exactly. And the second reason has to do with, you guessed it, energy.
Energy.
Remember that surplus of energy?
Yeah.
Mitochondria gave eukaryotic cells.
All right.
Well, that extra energy allowed them to handle this larger, more complex genome. Bacteria, with their limited energy budget,
Mm-hmm.
have to keep their genomes streamlined and efficient.
Right.
Eukaryotes could afford to be a bit messier.
So it's like having a bigger budget allows you to splurge on things
Exactly.
you might not strictly need, even if they're not, like, essential.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And this tolerance for extra genetic baggage
Yeah.
may have paved the way for another defining feature of eukaryotes, the nucleus.
Oh, The nucleus, every eukaryotic cell has one. But
Yes,
why?
right.
What's so special about keeping your DNA tucked away
Mm.
in this separate little compartment?
Lane has this fascinating theory about this.
Okay.
He suggests that the nucleus actually evolved as a defense mechanism
Okay.
against those invading introns.
Oh, so it wasn't like part of the original plan,
Right.
but more like a brilliant evolutionary adaptation
Precise.
to a messy situation.
It's like building a wall to keep out unwanted visitors.
Okay, I like it. And speaking of messy situations,
Right.
let's talk about another hallmark of eukaryotic life, sex.
Ooh, getting spicy.
But seriously, though, sex is another thing
Mm-hmm.
that sets eukaryotes apart.
Right.
Why did they evolve this complex and often cumbersome way of reproducing?
Yeah, it's a question that has puzzled biologists for ages.
All right.
But Lane connects the dots back to, you guessed it, mitochondria.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How do mitochondria factor into sex?
Yeah.
It seems like a pretty big leap from energy production to, well, making babies.
Think about it this way. Mitochondria, being former bacteria,
Right.
have their own DNA.
They do.
And just like any DNA, it can mutate,
Right.
leading to different versions of mitochondrial genes.
Okay.
Now, some of those mutations can be harmful, even lethal,
Mm-hmm.
if they're not masked by a good copy of the gene.
So you've got this mix of good and bad mitochondria floating around in the cell.
Right.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It could be. That's where sex comes in.
Okay.
By shuffling genes through recombination.
Right.
Sex allows for this constant mixing of mitochondrial genes. This helps eliminate those harmful mutations, ensuring that offspring inherit this healthy set of mitochondria.
It's like a game of genetic musical chairs.
Exactly.
Constantly switching partners to avoid getting stuck with a bad match.
And this constant gene shuffling might also explain why eukaryotes have two sexes.
Wait, two sexes because of mitochondria? Now that's a plot twist.
Yeah, it's a fascinating idea. Remember how harmful
Yeah.
those mitochondrial mutations can be?
Right.
Well, having two sexes
Mm-hmm.
with only one parent, typically the mother,
Yeah.
passing on their mitochondria
Mm-hmm.
helps to further limit the spread of those harmful mutations.
So it's like a quality control check,
Precisely.
ensuring that only the best mitochondria
Right.
get passed on to the next generation.
And this brings us to another consequence
Okay.
of having two sexes and inheriting mitochondria from only one parent aging.
Aging, we all experience it.
We do.
Why? What's the connection to mitochondria?
This is where things get really interesting. Lane argues that the same mechanisms that protect us from harmful mitochondrial mutations, early in life, those quality control checks we were talking about, actually contribute to aging later on.
Wait, so the things that keep us healthy when we're young
Yeah.
are the very things that make us age. That's a cruel twist.
It might seem counterintuitive, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
From an evolutionary perspective.
Okay.
Selection pressures are strongest on traits that affect survival and reproduction early in life.
Because if you don't survive long enough to reproduce,
Exactly.
your genes are out of the game.
Your genes are out of the game.
Evolutionarily speaking.
So these mechanisms that eliminate bad mitochondria
Right.
are super beneficial for young organisms.
Okay.
But as we get older, those same mechanisms become less effective.
So those quality control checks start to slip,
Right.
and we end up with a buildup of dysfunctional mitochondria.
That's what Lane proposes.
Yeah.
He suggests that this accumulation of dysfunctional mitochondria is a major driver of aging.
So it's not just about damage from free radicals,
Right. It's not just about wear and tear.
as the traditional theory suggests.
It's about a decline in the efficiency of our cellular powerhouses.
So it's like a gradual power outage in our cells.
A great way to put it.
The lights start to flicker,
Yeah.
and eventually the whole system shuts down.
And this idea that declining mitochondrial function plays a role in aging
Yeah.
has some fascinating implications
Okay.
for how we think about aging and disease.
I'm all ears. This is getting really thought-provoking.
Well, if aging is at least partly driven by this decline in mitochondrial function, it suggests that there might be ways to slow down the aging process
Okay.
by targeting mitochondria directly.
So instead of just treating the symptoms of aging,
Exactly.
we could address the root cause.
It's a bold idea.
Yeah.
And there's still much research to be done.
Right.
But Lane's work opens up these new avenues for understanding not only the origin of life,
Right.
but also the processes that shape our lives from beginning to end.
This is all incredibly fascinating. We've covered so much ground already,
Okay.
from those energetic hydrothermal vents to
Hmm.
the evolution of the nucleus and even sex.
It's wild.
But I'm really curious to hear more about
Yeah.
how this mitochondrial decline actually plays out as we age.
Hmm.
What are like the specifics?
That's a great question, and it leads us to some even more intriguing ideas from the book.
Okay.
In the next part, we'll delve into the details of how mitochondria influence the aging process
Okay.
and explore some of the implications for understanding age-related diseases.
All right, we're back and ready to unpack this whole idea of mitochondria, as the drivers of both complexity and its costs. It's
Right.
like they're both the heroes and the villains of our cellular story,
Mhm.
giving us this incredible potential, but also setting us up for this like inevitable decline.
Exactly. And the fascinating part is that this connection between mitochondria and aging isn't just some theory.
Right?
Lane backs it up with some real-world examples
Okay.
that really bring the concept to life.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Give me those juicy details.
One example he uses is birds.
Birds.
Birds, especially those that fly,
Yeah.
need a ton of energy.
Right.
So their mitochondria have to be super efficient
Okay.
to meet those high demands.
Makes sense.
Think of them like these high-performance engines.
Okay.
Finely tuned, running at full throttle.
But I'm guessing there's a catch, right?
You got it.
High performance usually comes with a price.
Those high-performance mitochondria in birds
Yeah.
are also much more sensitive to any kind of mismatch
Okay.
between their genes and the genes in the nucleus.
Right. So the nucleus, holds most of the cell's DNA,
Exactly.
and those genes need to work in harmony
Right.
with the mitochondrial
It's
genes.
like having two instruction manuals, one for the engine and one for the rest of the car.
Right.
They need to be perfectly compatible for everything to run smoothly.
And any incompatibility can
Sorry.
throw things off.
Exactly. Leading to less efficient energy production,
Okay.
more harmful free radicals leaking out,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately a shorter lifespan.
So birds with their need for this peak mitochondrial performance
Yeah.
have evolved to be incredibly good at weeding out those genetic incompatibilities.
Right. They have a very low tolerance
Yeah.
for anything less than perfect mitochondrial function.
And that's why birds, despite their small size
Right.
and super fast metabolisms,
Yeah,
can actually live much longer than mammals of a similar size.
exactly.
Wow, that's amazing.
And almost like a trade-off.
Yeah.
High energy, high efficiency, long life.
So it's not just about how many mitochondria you have,
Right.
but how well they're working with the rest of the cell.
Exactly. It's like a finely tuned orchestra.
Yeah.
All the parts need to be in sync.
And this brings us to this concept
Right.
of a variable death threshold.
Yes.
Okay, so what is that?
Lane suggests that different species have different levels of tolerance
Okay.
for mitochondrial dysfunction.
So some species are more sensitive to those
Right.
little mitochondrial hiccups than others?
Precisely. For example, a bird might trigger apoptosis,
Which is?
program cell death,
Right.
at the first sign of mitochondrial trouble,
Okay.
while a rat might just shrug it off.
It's like having different levels of quality control.
Yeah.
Birds have this super strict system, eliminating any cells that don't meet their high standards.
Exactly.
But for other animals, like rats, that live fast and die young,
yeah.
having a higher tolerance for mitochondrial glitches might actually be beneficial.
That's right. They can reproduce quickly,
Yeah.
adapt to changing environments, even if their cells aren't running at peak efficiency.
So it's slow and steady for birds.
Yeah.
Fast and furious for rats.
Different evolutionary strategies at play.
Okay, but how does this all relate to human aging?
Right.
We're not exactly birds or rats.
Right. We're somewhere in between.
Yeah.
But this concept of a death threshold is still relevant.
Okay.
Lane argues that as we age, our cells gradually accumulate more and more mitochondrial mutations.
Right.
This leads to a slow decline in energy production
Okay.
and an increase in those damaging free radicals.
And eventually, the number of dysfunctional mitochondria
Yeah.
crosses that death threshold,
Right.
triggering this cascade of damage and ultimately the death of the cell.
Exactly. But here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay, what?
That death threshold might not be the same
Okay.
for every tissue in our body.
So you're saying some parts of our body are more sensitive
Precisely.
to those mitochondrial issues than others.
And this could explain why some organs, like the heart and brain,
Right.
are more vulnerable to age-related diseases.
So it's not just about how old we are chronologically, but about the mitochondrial age of different tissues?
It's a really interesting way to think about aging.
That's a really interesting way to think about aging.
And it raises this really exciting possibility.
Right.
If we could find ways to protect our mitochondria,
Okay.
or even replace damaged ones with healthy ones,
Yeah.
we might be able to slow down the aging process
Okay.
and prevent some of those age-related diseases.
No, that's a game changer.
It is.
But it makes perfect sense considering everything we've learned
Mhm.
about how crucial mitochondria are,
Right.
not just for the origin of complex life,
Yeah.
but for how our bodies function throughout our lives.
Exactly. Lane's book really encourages us to think beyond
Yeah.
those traditional ideas of evolution driven by genes and environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's energy,
Yeah.
the fundamental currency of life,
Right.
that plays this pivotal role in shaping life's journey.
It's been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
Exploring billions of years of evolution
I know.
from those ancient hydrothermal vents
Yeah.
to the complex beings we are today.
It's
And it leaves us with some really profound questions.
It does.
Like, if life exists on other planets, would it also rely on these proton gradients?
Yep.
Would it face similar evolutionary pressures?
Those are questions we can't answer yet,
Right.
but they highlight just how much there still is to discover
Yeah.
about the very nature of life.
Absolutely.
And it's that spirit of curiosity and questioning
Right.
that drives us to keep exploring and keep pushing the boundaries of what we know.
Absolutely. So if you're ready to dive even deeper
Yes.
to this fascinating world of bioenergetics and evolution,
Please do.
I highly recommend checking out The Vital Question by Nick Lane.
It's a great book.
It's a real mind bender in the best possible way.
It is.
And until next time, keep exploring,
Yeah.
keep questioning,
Yeah.
keep diving deep.
Yeah.